This next panel is about genetics, which, you know, if some of you are old enough, you remember when it was just weed. It wasn't what kind of weed, you were just happy to have some weed. Some of you remember when sinsemilla, right, means no seeds. That was a new thing a while ago, and now everything sounds like a dessert. What do you want? You want cake? You want cookies? You want gelato? You want sherbet? I crossed my sherbet with my gelato. I'm smoking sherblato. All right. You just ate. You're feeling a little. Did you have an edible too? Is that what happened? Did you? All right. But to lead us in this next panel, Canadian medical cannabis pioneer and founder of the Lush Industries. Let's hear it for the one and only Alex Revich.
Yes, awesome to be here. Got our great panelists coming up in the order of the picture, so not to confuse anybody, in case you've gotten haircuts since or grow your beards. Hello, everyone. Nice to see everyone here in Barcelona. A little bittersweet, with being the final ICBC Barcelona. It's been an amazing run, and so awesome to see everyone here. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We're actually just waiting for one person who just had to have a quick smoke break. He'll be here very soon. But I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Alex Revich. I come back here from Toronto, Canada, where we're still not a part of America, so stay tuned for that. Still independent. Here from Toronto, Canada, do a bunch of different things. I helped start ICBC back in Berlin in 2017. So I'm very proud of everything that ICBC has done. Shout out to Alex and the crew for that. And I also have an edibles contract manufacturing facility in Canada where we do about 140 different products for 35 different brands. So, all right, we got everyone together here now, and I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, starting with Kevin over here. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Pico. I'm founder of Swiss Agronomic Services and Plant Botanic Services. We are specialized on hemp feminized seeds for European market, fully registered under the European seeds champs, and we are specialists of import-export seeds under compliance. That's why I'm here today. And we are proud to achieve the new regulation, control and multiplication and registration of feminized seeds under the European seeds champs. So we did that last year, and we follow with the first feminized hemp seeds. I'm talking about following a real technical rules for feminized seeds.
All right, very cool. Thank you, Kevin. And Xavi?
Hello, hi, my name is Javier Gaya. I've been in the industry for some years now. Been out in Barcelona, Spain for about 20. I've had some interesting experiences with the road that entails genetics, as per the panel today. Worked with different seed banks, with tissue culture providers as well. Now I'm specializing in cultivation advisory for the pharmaceutical space. I'm working with a company called Avitas Global. It's a brand new service provider. We're helping licensed producers around the world elevate the quality of their product and gain market access. So yeah, happy to be here today.
Cool. Thank you. Marcus?
I'm Marcus Richardson, AKA the Bubble Man. I've been in the industry for a long time now, probably about 35 years. Started as a hemp activist in Manitoba. We got the first hemp field growing back there in 1994. And then just moved to BC, helped Hillary Black with the BC Compassion Club, started the Bubble Bag Company in '99, and now, 25 plus years later, I have my own Bubble Man brand that's in Canada and down in the US. I have a podcast show I do called Hash Church that I've done for the last 11 years. That's a very, very high-level, science-oriented PhDs, dialogue and conversation about cannabis. And yeah, just really happy to be here. Thanks.
Cool, Marcus. Awesome. And Justin?
Hi, I'm Justin Tomby. I'm with the Tallman Group, and we are headquartered in Ljubljana, Slovenia. We're here to help promote investment into a strong cannabis industry here in Europe and internationally. I'm also the founder of Phytonics, a cannabis hemp breeding company since 2018, selling seeds into South America, North America, Asia, and Europe. I've been in the cannabis industry since before it was an industry recognized. My whole life I participated in the medical, recreational, adult use, and hemp programs based out of my home in Southern Oregon. Been a breeder, been a cultivator, and a promoter of cannabis culture for most of my life, and I'm happy to be here with this crew in Cannabis.
All right, awesome. Round of applause for our panelists. Give them some energy, very cool. I'm really excited to be talking about this with these really experienced gentlemen here. We had a great conversation about it in advance. They come from different parts of the world, and one thing that was very apparent is that different parts of the world have different views on genetics. Like one thing I learned is that in agriculture, in Europe, there's no patents for agriculture, which I thought was really interesting. And some places require licenses for these genetics. Even though seeds are not controlled in some cases, some places do require licenses. So maybe we'll start off by talking about some of the differences. And for example, Europe with no patents on agriculture, like that's very interesting. Kevin, maybe you want to start us off with some of the differences you find doing your business internationally.
So yes, it's a different. But the main difference is Europe doesn't recognize a patent on gen, on the vegetal material, who is, on some way, a good thing, I think. That doesn't mean you have the right to copy a genetic. The European seed schemes have a verification and have a worldwide bibliothèque who can verify if you are not stealing a genetic. But it's the definition about what is a cultivar or strain. It's for Europe in the cannabis, for the cannabis sativa L, they consider a strain for 4 generations. After 3 generations actually, and sometimes per derogation, 4 generations for commercialization if it's some stock missing. But it's only 4 generations. So that means if you use the gen from someone, it's completely legal. It's actually called the privilege of the selectionneurs in Europe. And the system, it's a system where it's not a patent, it's a maintenance. So you are maintainers, and it's a system with a 3-party, where you have the breeders, the maintainers, and the applicant, who will have the full right on the strain for 10 years, and then they can extend for another 10 years. And then after 20 years, this strain become a public domain.
That's interesting. Justin, what do you think?
Just to tag in briefly, it's true that in general, nationally, patent law doesn't apply to naturally occurring living beings. Certainly, there are some methods of genetic modification that bring living organisms into the realm of patentable IP. What Kevin was speaking about is the registration of varieties that are protected in their different jurisdictions of, in North America, we have the plant variety protection, PVP. Here in Europe, I believe there's
CPVO.
CPVO, then there's the UPOV. All of these are meant to recognize the efforts that breeders put into creating a variety that's recognized by it being distinct, uniform, and stable, so that the efforts of the breeding, that particular cultivar, stand out from other phenotypes or chemotypes, and that it will show a kind of uniformity across the propagation material that you can say is pretty consistent and recognizable, and that it's stable from generation to generation. So those are some of the elements that go into breeding that inform a protected variety under these different legal jurisdictions.
Yeah, then it's grown out and tested by a third party in this case. So you actually have to pay, I think it's like 2,000 euros per strain to get it tested. Now I think they have over 400 strains in the CPVO that are protected, not patented. But yeah, there's a way of getting it done.
Oh, very cool, and always love chatting with all these panelists. But Marcus was very particular about terminology and not calling strains. That they should be called cultivars, and strains are more like viruses, which is kind of makes sense. I never really thought of it that way. And he brought up some really interesting points around some words that I'm still trying to pronounce: esters and thiols, which are very important. Everyone always talks about terpenes with genetics, and terpenes are important, but there's actually a lot of factors outside of terpenes, and I'm hoping Marcus can kind of explain without going too deep into the science with them. How do you explain to kind of laymen what we should call it and some of these other substances other than terpenes?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I was lucky enough to have an amazing mentor in this space, which I really want to give him a shout out right now on stage to David Watson, aka Skunkman Sam.
Yes, Skunkman
Getting
Sam,
a little
rest in
shaky
peace.
in my voice right now. Sorry about that. He passed away recently. And Sam was the breeder of skunk number 1. He bred the Durban poison. Skunk number 1 is, I believe, the first and one of the only registered strains in Holland. So that's how he went about the IP. He had the strain registered. But back in early 2000s, Sam did an experiment with a lot of us. Dr. Ethan Russo was involved, and I think Ed Rosenthal ended up writing an article on mangoes. If you learned about the entourage effect, which was, I believe Ethan Russo called it the entourage effect, and Dr. Lester Grinspoon called it the ensemble effect. But basically, this was all based on work that Sam did, where he would invite us to his apartment, and he had pure cannabinoids and pure terpenes, and this was the beginning of the conversation that terpenes modulate the effects of cannabinoids. And so it took us a long time, but as we sort of traveled down that pathway and a lot of amazing conversations on Hash Church, we started discovering through, thank goodness, Nick Ziegler, who was the chief extractor at Yakima Chief Hops, and they were doing about 4,000 kilos of hops a day in extractions, and they built this incredible analytic equipment that they sort of, jerry-rigged together, because this is going beyond a billion, right? So you have proton NMR that gets you to the billionth, and then you have these types of equipment that you can put together and create, getting down into the trillionth. And this is where you start perceiving thiols and thiolates. And they discovered over 1,400 thiols present in hops. And obviously hops is a relative of cannabis. And we know that a lot of the, without my conversations with Nick, I wouldn't know that sort of onion or garlic smell isn't actually a terpene at all. It's a thiol. And so thiols are in these infinitely small amounts. And so the human brain, the way we follow, our intuitive thinking, is we think if terpenes have 8% of the mass, then that has to be where the flavor profile is coming from. But these esters and thiols and thiolates that are on these much smaller levels, think of them as like tiny little grains of sand, where you have the terpene profile, which is an upside down pyramid, sitting on that little grain, and that little grain can shift the entire profile and completely change the flavor profile. And I know the conversation today is about genetics, but we know that, from a CFO, sure, they're looking at yields, they're looking at certain things, but we know that the popularity of a cultivar is driven by its flavor profile.
Yeah, that's awesome. And can we just get a round of applause for Skunkman,
Yeah.
Dave
Big
Watson,
up.
one of the
Man.
legends. Any other thoughts on what Marcus just said, Justin?
Sure. I mean, I would say that, we've only begun the discussion about the pharmacokinetic effects of the volatiles, right? And we have been focusing on terpenes as the most obvious by volume and by weight component of these volatile aromatics. These volatile sulfur compounds that we're talking about, or the esters, or these things are much, much, much smaller, but incredibly significant aspects that to date haven't really been incorporated into our breeding and selection programs by an analytical or data-driven methodology, right? What we've been using is the olfactory sense and the connection that we have intuitively. But I'll tell you, some of these, the language that we've developed to talk about cannabis, right? We started with this very binary approach of sativa and indica, with these ideas that one's long and slow developing and has an energizing effect, and one's short and bushy and heavy flowering and has a sedative effect. And we thought, oh, we can divide cannabis into this, breed accordingly. But what you see out there in the world today in terms of cultivars and varieties is not easily described so bipolar. It's a hybrid of these things. So then we turn to the concept of, okay, there's these clusters of terpenes, monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes, that we can say is groupings, primarily carophyllines and the limonene, the terpinolines, the myrcenes, and we can say there's 3 primary clusters of these, and maybe we can classify cannabis based on this and how we will see flavor profiles and aromas in these groupings. But then we find that really distinct noses and flavors occupy these same clusters that are characterized by the same terpenes. Chemdog and Tropicana exist in the same cluster, but if you've ever held them, you know those are really distinct and different flavor profiles. So then we talk about what are, again, the effects and the pharmacokinetics involved, and what are we really selecting for in our breeding programs. And to Marcus's point here, we don't really have the refined capacity in the industry to measure, detect, analyze this, and use this as part of our selective processes for breeding. And that's part of where the future is headed, I think.
I think it also speaks to the fact that there are people in the cannabis space, and David Watson was certainly one of them, that have this uber-sensitive olfactory and ability to perceive also the stone that comes along with that, or the high, whatever you want to call it. And you know, don't knock that olfactory. There is a reason why a very small percentage of people on the planet can be sommeliers. And I think those very same people with those very same uber-sensitive olfactories, I've met them throughout my career in cannabis. And the people who really seem to shine have these heightened senses of olfactory. I myself, my olfactory is through the roof. I can definitely tell you there is more bad smells in the world than there are good. My wife only had an understanding of how strong my smell was the 3 times that she got pregnant, because her olfactory just went off when she got pregnant each time. But yeah, there's real value. We may not have the equipment. We may not be perceiving it with analytical equipment currently, but we are certainly perceiving it through the bioassay.
Yeah. And again, understanding of the complexities on a global level through all the testing, there's just not enough capacity through these machines to give you an accurate reality of what's being represented in a sample. So just because you find something with a low terpene level doesn't mean that it might not be something of extreme benefit to a patient, or something with extreme bag appeal. So I think this is one of the you know, I guess it's a shame in the industry right now, because you know, at the Global Cannabis Exchange, for example, we're putting a lot of you know, batches out there. We're seeing cannabinoid levels, and they're being matched to terpene levels, but that's it. And it's just a very basic pairing of cannabinoids to terpenes. And to Marcus's point, the complexity and the small size of these molecules. It's interesting because this makes me remember, you know, the fight or flight response that we as humans have, because you know, if something is extremely aromatic or it's full of terpenes, and yeah, you get that nose, but we're detecting these thiols and these esters and these at such minute levels. The question is why? And I think us as humans have evolved to be able to detect these dangerous smells, because in nature they would have, you know, it would have been like a methane gas coming out of a lake, or you know, so you know, even a fart, like, you know, sorry to say that, but we're very, very sensitive to those smells. And it's curious, you know, just to kind of end on this note of terpenes, is that sometimes the smells that you would categorize as unpleasant, you know, from like cat piss to baby
Cat piss, ammonia,
or,
yeah.
you know, are things that we see regularly in cannabis, and they're actually appealing somehow. And I think this is one of those, you know, I think things that we still need to touch up on.
Well, N-butyl thiol 1 is a perfect example, and that is what comes out of a skunk's anal glands. And that is something that most people think is a very terrible smell, but a lot of people in the cannabis world have learned to really appreciate that smell.
I know, when you smell a skunk like that got run over, and you're like, oh, it's like from a distance, it kind of reminds you of a joint, and
like
your
a
kids are like,
roadkill.
oh, it's gross, and you're like, that kind of smells kind of nice. I know, it is kind of weird. And I learned a lot in talking to you all about, because you look at, sometimes you buy cannabis with high terpenes, and you look at it and you're like, no, I don't know, it doesn't smell like it has high terpenes, even though it says it does. it's all these other factors.
Well, the main factor is that we don't have a cold supply chain in cannabis. Like if we were all selling broccoli and spinach and doing it without a cold supply chain, it would all arrive as liquid when the container landed. But for some reason, we think we can't have a cold supply chain. So it's very likely that the terpenes were at that level when they were tested in the lab. But when they made it to the market 6 to 8 months later, they had volatilized off. And this is like one of the main things that legal cannabis is so obsessed with.
Yeah, that's a problem.
They want to stabilize cannabis, and cannabis by its very nature is volatile.
Right, and sometimes sold 8 months after it's packed. That's a problem we have in
Which,
like, in
if
our-
you had it in a
Canada.
deep freezer, it wouldn't matter.
But they
Everything
don't.
would
But
be
they don't.
exactly the same.
These
but-
pharmaceutical operators, when they keep long-term storage and they avoid it at all costs, they try to have a first in, first out. But when they do have long-term storage, it's kept at room temperature. It's kept at the coldest. It might be at 16 degrees Celsius, maybe 18 degrees Celsius, but that's not enough for long-term preservation of these secondary.
I mean,
metabolites.
all we're doing is slowing down the vibration of the molecules. And, you know, when you have cannabis at room temperature, these molecules are moving back and forth and they're volatilizing, and you put it into a fridge at, 4 degrees Celsius, and now they're moving much slower, but you get them into a minus 20 to minus 40 Celsius freezer, and now there would be no motion whatsoever. They haven't stabilized, but you can preserve them for years and years and years in a deep freezer at minus 40 degrees Celsius plus.
No, and you guys are such a wealth of knowledge, and you mentioned Skunkman, the legend, and there's so many other legends in this game. Everyone talks about Jack Herrera, his son. I saw him outside. He's still representing. People talk about Ryan Lee, who I think is in the audience as well. Could you maybe shout out some of the other people that you've learned from, and some of the kind of the legends that kind of made you guys who you are today? I don't know, Kevin, if you want to start us off. Any legend that you really appreciate that kind of made you who you are?
I mean, the first people bring genetic was, in my case, was hippie from the 70s, 80s. When they get back from Afghanistan, Pakistan, they build communities. Certain people who had PTSD and after the Second World War lived there, build a community. When the stability and the security was not anymore guaranteed, they come back to Europe. Plenty of seats, and for me, that's my legend. So that's the unknown people, and actually, I think yes, we must recognize all the legend, but behind all of the legend is thousands and thousands of little people. Normal people was moving seeds from all around the world, crossing, get risk, and then fight and sometimes leave the country to another one to keep their genetic with them, and that's all of these people. We must be really grateful. All the industry must be grateful
For sure.
from all of these people, of this little legend, make today. This panel, and still we lose a lot. We lose a lot of genetic, but the one we have, it's a part of all of these little hands.
For sure, and we got to keep telling the story. And people in the audience are listening to you, and then they're learning something, and maybe they'll be on a panel in 5-10 years doing the same. Javier, who do you give props to?
I think we have to recognize that collectively we stand on the shoulders of all of these giants, and it comes generationally. So from David Watson and Rob Clark and Mel Frank and Jorge Cervantes and that wave, and then to a newer wave for me was with Shanti Baba, who's a breeder at Mr.
Baba,
Nice,
yes.
and Howard Marks, rest in peace as well. I was very blessed to be able to, be baptized in such a way in this cannabis industry. In the cannabis industry. So I think there's the breeders that we owe tribute to. There's too many of them to name, but I've had the privilege to call some of them my friends. So
Awesome. Marcus, besides obviously Skunkman.
Well, I gotta give a shout out to Skunkman Sam again. Skunkman Sam was the hippie that Kevin was talking about. He traveled to all the hash-producing countries. He went to Afghanistan in pre-70. He brought the 1,000 Afghani seeds back to Holland, of which only one cracked and became the Afghan that everyone used in Amsterdam, literally. The work that this man did is just, it would take hours even to break it down and explain it. He didn't just work with big companies and do, the work that he did with marijuana botany and Rob Clark.
Sativex and all that.
The Hortifarm, Sativex, and Epidiolex, all of it. He was the first one to do water hash. He created the static sift of using your hand to statically isolate glandular trichome heads from
Triploids.
Triploids. I mean, just an endless amount of stuff that this man did. So always the highest praise to David Watson, aka Skunkman Sam. Also, for me, Howard Marks was a huge inspiration. He wasn't a breeder, he wasn't a grower, but he was a procurer. He made sure that hash got out to the people, and that was very important. He was a smuggler, and he smuggled hash all over the world. And I was also very blessed to be able to call him a friend and be able to have conversations with him. Other legends which were mentioned from, that weren't mentioned would be the Hayes brothers, who, of course, Skunkman Sam just happened to be their neighbors when he lived in Santa Cruz. So
Wow.
these guys, of course, right? Like, who else? It was Frank Zappa on one side, and it was the Hayes brothers on the other side. That was where he lived in Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
So, the Hayes brothers were a big part of it. I'm a big fan of terpenoline and long-flowering cultivars, so I got to give those guys a shout-out. Shout-out, obviously, to Rob Clark and to Mel Frank as well, Jim Goodwin. So many to mention, and Ryan Lee. I would shout out Ryan Lee as well, who is really, no one studied more under Dave Watson when it came to genetics. Dave got to mentor me in regards to hashish production, but he mentored Ryan in regards to all of his breeding knowledge, and they worked very closely together. So shout out.
And many thanks to Ryan Lee for preserving and continuing his legacy. And
and shout out to all the hash smugglers and all the people who were in prison doing all this, and the great Frenchy Cannoli, you mentioned, kind of hash guys. I'm sure you have to give him a shout out. Justin, anyone you want to shout out before we go to the?
Sure. Let's see. I'll start with James Reynolds, who we had the pleasure of working with directly, a long-time West Coast breeder coming out of Columbia, working with early strains of Columbia Gold, and then carrying that forward. I'll tag another name, which is a little bit more modern and approach-oriented. Kevin McKernan of Medicinal Genomics, who did some really wonderful work mapping and sequencing the cannabis genome, and was really instrumental in our work in helping determine, which alleles in this gene sequence weren't firing, as we were trying to determine how our CBG cultivar Serenity was in fact distinct from some other cultivars on the market, and you get into these little turf wars with breeders that happens. And he just really deepened my understanding a lot of how expression really is happening from the cannabis genome, and how we can tune into that with some of the modern methods.
And that's important, mapping out the genome. There's a guy to Canada, Jonathan Page. Got to shout out Jonathan Page for doing that. And we're going to do one more topic, and then we're going to open it up to questions. I have a feeling there's going to be a whole lot of questions in the audience for you guys. But the next thing is a very hot topic we were talking about, and it's a bit contentious. We were talking about different genetics for cannabis versus hemp. And it's a bit strange because we all know that cannabis and hemp is kind of the same thing, but they've really been separated, whether that's for loophole purposes or for various other purposes. But if someone wants to kind of talk to kind of the differences to think about when you're kind of breeding for cannabis versus hemp, and should we just stop calling those two separate things?
Pre the breeding part of the question, I will say that in 1994, when we approached our government, we approached our Minister of Agriculture, Harry Enns in Manitoba, and our Minister of Finance. And we were very young, and we went to the school of Jack Hare. We had, met Jack in 95 in Amsterdam, 94. Sorry, that same year we met Jack. We got the book, Emperor Wears No Clothes. And in that book, there's an article that says the $1 billion crop. And it's the front page of Popular Mechanics from 1932, I believe. It was the first time billion and dollar had ever been used in an economic statement. So we got the bright idea that we would call our deck the $1 trillion crop, which definitely got his attention. But he was kind of like, guys, I don't have really time to waste. But we told those guys the fib that cannabis and hemp were different plants and that hemp was a distant cousin of cannabis. And that was really how we got the license to grow hemp in Canada in 94 and 95. So you just gotta kind of understand everything's language, and if you use the right language to the gatekeepers, the door opens. And if you use the wrong language to the gatekeepers, the door stays closed. So for me, that was the major difference back then on why we told that little fib.
I definitely want to tag in on that real quickly, because what happens sometimes is that little fib becomes part of our legacy language, right? And then we have, you know, I don't remember the Canadian researcher's name. Maybe somebody here on the panel can help me out, who coined the term hemp as being associated with a 0.3% or less delta-9 THC. Anyway, this was based on a set of studies that he was doing completely unrelated to real cannabinoid content. He was measuring leaves, stems, a number of things, not the inflorescence. Yet somehow that made its way into literature as a
United Nations even.
right, as a some kind of metric that would distinguish between this artificial hemp versus cannabis dialectic that we created, and then became encoded in law and became a regulation that now restricts what kind of cannabis varieties we can grow as legal industrial hemp. It's completely arbitrary. It's not based on science. It's based on a misconception, but it is some legacy language.
Prohibition era language, yeah.
And so that's the interesting conundrum we have, is how do we upgrade our language and the metrics we use, and then the regulations that come from those to better reflect reality, so we can move forward in a sane and healthy way.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Sorry, you want to say?
Actually, hemp is just an answer of marijuana, who is, in the beginning, cannabis. So basically, everything is cannabis sativa L, so that's the biologic, okay? But after, to make happen the prohibition, cannabis has too much a good reputation, too much use, too much history, so they switched the name for marijuana, and hemp, it's actually the way to have a cannabis plant legal. Actually, right now, if we talk about today, the only difference between the term cannabis and the term hemp in Europe regarding genetic is the registration of the seeds. That's it. Any cannabis seeds not registered is a cannabis seeds. And hemp seeds to be considered as hemp seeds right now, for the moment, is when is registered and certified by the regulator.
Yeah, and we're going to open it up to questions.
Let me say one more thing about that. I wanted to shout out another mentor of mine, Ron Hickey. He was my original mentor. I met him at a very young age, and this man served 11 years in a federal penitentiary for being a habitual florist, for liking cannabis and having cannabis. And if you want to know the difference between hemp and cannabis, after he served his 11 years in prison, we took him to our first legal hemp field in Manitoba. It was a 5-acre experimental hemp field. And he cried. So it was definitely real to him.
That's very powerful. That's awesome. Just a quick round of applause for the panelists before we get into questions. Thank you.
There's a question right there.
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a lot. You're going to have to hold these people back, and Guy, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions.
A million questions.
I will not hold anybody.
We don't have a lot of time, so please keep your questions brief and keep them as questions, not stories.
I'll be quick.
Preguntas, no historias.
Okay.
Okay.
When we talk about strains of cultivars and the different qualities that they offer, the breeders and the genetics developers today, what type of qualities are they most focused on? What type of qualities are mass markets demanding today? And by mass markets, I guess I mean like Canada, United States, like really big markets. And not just growers, but also end consumers, like the mass end consumer. What type of qualities are geneticists solving?
From a pharmaceutical import and export perspective, which is the space that I'm working on, it's almost exclusively cannabinoid levels, very specifically THC right now. That's the main metric. It's I'm not too pleased. I think there's so much more that can be into it, but right now that's the main driver for price around the world.
And
It's always price. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to tag briefly and say I'm looking forward to us breaking the tyranny of COAs and people who associate the quality and the effectiveness of any given flower or cannabis product based on the analytical certificate of analysis that they have in front of them that gives them a numerator for a cannabinoid and maybe for some terpene contents, and thinks that represents really the quality of the flower. And unfortunately, that's driving the market, which then to some degree drives breeding practices. I'm looking forward to us breaking that.
I don't see the masses caring about quality. The masses love floor sweepings sprayed with distillate and botanical terpenes. If you want the #1 brand, I know I see you doing that, it hurts my soul too. But if you want the #1 brand, like we're all anomalies. We want to get the best. We're all like, oh, we want the best, we want the best. Like, the best is what someone will buy when they come into the store, and they're buying with their dollar. And on my show one year in Hash Church, we were talking, because we're all utopian dreamers of cannabis, and we want everyone to experience the most perfect expression of the plant. And then Debbie Goldsberry, who's been selling weed in California at the Berkeley Patients Group, is like, guys, I love it. I love you guys. I love your passion, but people don't give a shit about anything other than price. They come in, they ask me what the THC price number is. They want the cheapest price for the highest THC number. And you have to keep in mind, like, what's the #1 selling beer in the world? Like, is it Budweiser or Coors or like some low quality non-IPA beer? Guaranteed. Like, do you think there are more 5-star restaurants than there are McDonald's? Like, I can promise you there aren't, because people like that value. The majority of people are purchasing with their dollar. So
Marcus, to quote a friend of mine, who I think is here in the audience, Alexander Gautier from Origin Nature, he says that there's no such thing as bad cannabis. There's only badly priced cannabis.
Yes, I've heard him say that before, and I agree. That's true.
He hasn't had the floor sweepings with distillate and botanical terpenes.
Got time for another question?
One more over there.
Got it.
Let's hear it for Michael Knote, by the way.
Yeah.
German YouTube star.
He doesn't need to go to the gym after these days.
He's going to be on a panel after this. He rode his bicycle here.
Oh, yeah. He's
Not
getting
from
his steps
Germany,
in.
but
Getting his steps.
So through the years.
it's on. Just hold it closer to your face.
All right. So through the years, have you seen like as the genetics? Can you compare the genetics as the market of fashion market? Like through the 20 last years, have you seen something change, or is something that is getting hype again, or is something new that is touching the market?
Yeah, what's like the new things for genetics? Anything that's kind of changed? We find maybe.
I mean, there are. As far as there are trends in the industry that we're seeing with genetics that they at least as far as MSOs go, they're not necessarily in the way of a specific terpene profile. They're more of some of the products of how they're bred. So you'll see very, very stable and improved autoflower genetics. You have F1 varieties that come to revolutionize the game completely, that can be germinated and put into flower in 3 weeks, complete uniformity. So I think these are some of the trends that you'll start to see in the future. But again, I think as far as terpenes and flavors go, that's often that's very cyclical. So just like old trends, they come back in fashion. So that's just.
I would add to that it's the value of being a smaller company versus an MSO. MSOs, like you say, they build these huge giant ships, and when the market trends change, these ships take an enormous amount of time to turn. But if you're a small, more micro breeder or grower, you can follow those trends much quicker than the MSOs. And when the flavor profiles change, you can be on there within 6 months and getting that out to the market, where that MSO, no way they'll get that out in under 2 years.
That's good business advice. Being nimble and being able to pivot is such an important thing in this industry. Very important for
Yeah, I have an example of a flying ninja or the captain of the Titanic, and you can choose which one you want to be.
I would just say also for new important kind of aspects of breeding in the cannabis space, polyploidy is going to be something that people will become more and more cognizant of.
Well, what'd you say?
Polyploidy, so the number of chromosomes that are And so seedless varieties, for example, of watermelons is a place where we see this play out, and now the development of some seedless varieties of cannabis are happening. But there's also a lot of vigor that can be found in triploids or different kinds of polyploids, and this is something that's now being able to be recognized, selected for, brought into breeding programs. I think we'll become slowly more aware of that.
Oh, the Sensimilia is coming back.
We're
Yeah,
running out
also
of time. Sorry.
It's also many. I mean, you can think about many different ways on genetics, on what you can provide to the end customers, or why you do this program of breeding on another. It can be industrialization, it can be mechanization, it can be a claim. You can attach a claim to a strain with a study. You can attach a patent of a product with an hemp fiber strain, cultivar, and the patent of this product with this characteristic, it's patented with this strain. So it's so many different aspects right now. The breeding company or the breeders can take care in consideration to have a successful product. And with the regulation and the maturation and professionalization of this industry, you will find more and more destination and more, let's say, key point where you can focus to increase your breeding program.
Oh, excellent point. Well, amazing panel with amazing panelists. Thank you so much. Round of applause.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, I want to shout out Alex Rogers and Ngayo from the ICBC. They always do such a great job, and they bring such a great.
Shout out. Big up.
Yeah.
Hey, aw, thank you.
Give thanks.
Thank you very much. You're all very sweet. Remain seated. All right. We're going to get on to, we're going to take a picture? Okay. Quickly.